How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about George A. Romero Presents Deadtime Stories Volume 1 and Volume 2. This is from 2009, Volume 1, and 2011 for Volume 2, and I'm going to be reviewing both of them at once. These are produced and hosted by George A. Romero. However, none of them are either written or directed by him, so I don't know how much involvement he actually had in these. All 6 stories are written by Jeff Monahan, so he was probably more in charge of this project than Romero was. But, you know, his name's on the front, he's what sells it. I'm going to be talking about each of these stories individually, and then we'll move on to the 2 anthology films as a whole. Volume 1, Story 1, Valley of the Shadow, directed by Jeff Monahan. This is about a woman who funds a journey into South America under the pretext of looking for this rare gourd with a special chemical property. However, this is really the spot in the jungle where her husband went missing, and that's what she's really there for, to try to find her missing husband. But of course, being a jungle horror film, things don't go great with the natives down there. Now, jungle horror used to get, you know, European exploitation movies from like the 70s and 80s. Think The Man from Deep River or Cannibal Holocaust. But really, you haven't seen this genre active ever since then. You know, it kind of fell out of favor, and every now and then you get, I think Eli Roth did one, but you don't see really any jungle horror movies nowadays, so it's kind of interesting to look back at the genre, but it didn't really provide anything new that the old films didn't do when they were active. And the ending, it built to a good enough ending, but it's kind of ruined by a special effect that didn't quite work. But overall, this is an okay story. Number 2, Wet, directed by Michael Friska. This is about a beachcomber who finds a jade box buried in the beach with a body part in it. He takes that out and tries to sell just the box, but the guy at the store he tries to sell it to was actually the guy who buried it, and he said that this is actually a box that contains a mermaid. The idea is the only way to kill a mermaid is you have to cut it up and put the different pieces into these boxes, and that keeps it from regrowing. He says, put the one you found back and don't touch these again. But of course, this is a horror story, and you know he's going to be too tempted by the jade, and of course things go terribly. While it is a little predictable, this is actually probably the best of all the short horror films on Volume 1. I don't know. I like it. It's a little predictable, but it's fun enough, and it is a cool creature. You don't get too many mermaid movies. Although that being said, I was at Walmart recently, and I saw one of them, and I saw one on Amazon Prime, so maybe mermaids are coming back. I don't know. The third one, House Call, directed by Tom Savini, special effects legend Tom Savini. And why this film is directed really cool, it's kind of made to look like an older horror movie with some really cool camera effects. It does move kind of slowly. House Call is about a woman whose son insists that he's a monster, he's dangerous, and has to be tied to the bed. However, the mom doesn't quite believe that he's dangerous, because, you know, it's his mom, and calls a doctor to see what's up with him. So she gets the doctor down there, explains the situation, and of course, things are going to hit a breaking point. But it moves very slowly. It's lots of long conversations, and for the most part, you get where this is going. There's one thing at the end that you probably didn't guess, but for the most part, you know where this is going. So it's a really cool directed movie with interesting cinematography, but overall it's just very slow. Moving on to Volume 2 now. Volume 2, Story 1, The Gorge is about a group of spelunkers who accidentally fall into the gorge, and two of them are okay, but one of them has his leg broken. It's actually the fiance of this lady who's in there with them, so you get this guy, the lady and her fiance, and the fiance is the one who has the broken leg, and it turns into this really hardcore survival story because no one really knows where they are, and they're stuck in there for a long time, and it gets really desperate and dire. But the thing with this one is the Gorge part is really just the first half of it. There's this whole secondary segment, like, I had to pause it. I thought I was done with this story, and then I come back to it, and I unpause it. I'm like, oh wait, the story's still going. It has this whole secondary segment, and it really just drags it out, and it really should have been pick one or the other. So either have the first segment and just get a little bit of the second as like an epilogue, or do the second and flash back to the first in little pieces. Having two, it just really drags it. And this really transitions me into the big problem with Volume 2, is Volume 2, each one of the segments are about 5 minutes longer, and it doesn't help them get more developed as they should. It just makes them longer and in general boring, you know. Story 2, On Sabbath Hill, this is once again directed by Jeff Monahan, the writer of all these, and this is easily the worst story in the whole bunch. Not just of Volume 2, but of Volumes 1 and 2. This is the worst. You get this professor who's a huge jerk, and it's a pain to follow this character around. I hated it. Jerks in horror movies happen all the time, but outside of, like, say, Tales from the Crypt or Stephen King, a lot of people don't do jerks right. And this movie is a good example. You get this jerk professor, and rather than going, oh man, what a weird guy, you just think, oh man, I'm stuck with him, aren't I? And yes, you are. One of the things he's a huge jerk about is his class. He insists that you never miss it, even if you're sick and have a doctor's note. You can never miss his class, and as to why, it's never explained. He gets one of his students pregnant, and her solution to this is to kill herself in the middle of one of his classes, and I think you can get between the two pieces, don't miss my class, she's dead. I think you can get what's going on. He starts to get haunted by her, and rather than being a cool ghost story, you get a lot of him just wandering around, and he's such a terrible character. And then on top of that, you get the wandering scenes where a lot of horror movies do this, where you just wander around aimlessly for forever, and it's terrible. Bad segment. Anyway, moving on. The third one, Dust, once again directed by Michael Friska, who did Wet from the first segment. This is probably the only one in Volume 2 that I really liked. It's about the scientist who gets dust from Mars, and he's found out that with this dust it has really good healing properties, but he needs access to a lab, but he doesn't have access to it, and if he asks for it, it's going to result in this higher-up scientist taking all the credit for his discovery. So he asks the security guard, whose wife is dying from cancer, let me into this lab I'm not supposed to, and no one else will have to die like your wife is dying. Which of course prompts him to say, what about my wife? And he says, oh, well, the testing will never be done by then, and you don't want anything horrible to happen. Well, he's going to risk it. He steals the security guard, gives him access to the lab, but also steals some of that Mars dust and gives it to his wife, at first seeming to result in great and wonderful things. She's not only better, but younger and more energetic. But of course, this is a horror short, and I think you know that this is going to end quite terribly. Overall, the two Wet and Dust, the Michael Friska ones, are the best out of this anthology, and I looked it up, and it makes sense because he had the most experience directing. He did My Mom's a Werewolf and Death Spa, so yeah, it makes sense that the one who's directed the most makes better shorts. Moving on to this thing as a whole, it's really low budget, and modern low budget doesn't have the charm as, say, 70s and 80s low budget, unfortunately. there's some good ideas, but they're never pushed far enough, and in general they're really slow and predictable. And I don't really like to bash on things, but I have to give my honest opinion. This is really only for Romero completionists, those who want every single thing with his name on them. I guess that's why I bought them. And if you really like short horror films, and if you really like anthologies, you can maybe watch, watch one at a time, space them out. I guess that would be okay. Don't binge watch both of them back to back like I did. That can just be too much. If you're a really big fan of short horror films or anthologies, maybe check this out, but this isn't super recommended. Like I said, I don't like to bash on stuff, and I really do like anthology films. I think there should be a playlist linked at the end of this video to me reviewing some of them, but overall I can't really recommend this one. And I'm not the... I hate being negative. I'm not the kind of channel that bashes stuff. But anyway, I hope to review more positive stuff soon. Anyway, to those of you who made it this far, I'd like to give you a big thank you. You're helping the channel out, and to everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping me out. Anyway, I'll be back, hopefully with something I can be more positive on. Anyway, have a good day, and I'll see you again next time.